I always get myself all ready to put my feet on a cushion when I sit cross-legged anyway.
You're right.
Oop. Well, I just sat on it, so.
What's
that
best
okay?
for the video when I always find these videos, I want to sit with my feet up.
Questions, conversation for Darren, and then pretty soon, you know, I don't know, maybe an hour into it or something like that, we'll just open it up and it'll be a conversation with all of us. So, yeah, and then Darren, if there's something that I'm asking you that you don't want to answer, or there's something that I'm not asking you that you think would be cool to talk about, just, you know, jump right in. We've had these evenings at Mahasuka. We've had 2 of them so far. They've been very different from each other. Originally, they were conceived as a way to be able to talk about with people who have different kinds of spiritual practices, other than, you know, the kind of Tibetan Buddhism that you know, that Mahasuka has been teaching for so long, and to talk about the ways in which spiritualities do the same things, the ways in which they connect, things that they have in common, and then the things that they don't. Maybe even the ways that things are languaged differently, but it ends up being the, you know, kind of similar thing. So that was the original purpose. The first person that came here was a kind of a radical Christian minister. What do you call a minister? Reverend. Okay. That kind of, it was wonderful, because he was not a traditional Christian reverend anyway. But that kind of went in that way. Then the second person, very, very different, was an atheist. So he didn't do religion or spirituality at all, and that, in fact, he was not interested in it, thought that it was problematic. This one is different again. Some of us know Darren as a Buddhist practitioner for how many years?
I guess 5 or 6.
5 or 6.
In a more formal way.
Yeah, and then some of us know him as a, you know, kind of world famous DJ. What neither group knows about Darren, though, is that he has been kind of involved in things spiritual probably for his entire life, and it's been a very diverse life. Sometimes in the form of formal religion, sometimes whether practicing it or rebelling against it. From what
Are definitely less credible than others, I have to say, but they've mostly been me kind of just fishing around trying to find a form of practice and spirituality that would actually make sense to me. And I started off, my parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, so I was immersed in that for a very long time, probably 16 or 17 years. And that's an interesting process in and of itself, because some people think of Jehovah's Witnesses as fundamentalists. They're not strictly fundamentalists, but they're very intense about their practice. And there are a lot of difficult things about that for me growing up, and as a teenager especially, I think. And it's very insular in some ways. But there's also a lot of beautiful things about it. And one of the things that it taught me was what a real spiritual practice looks like. It may not have been the one that I gravitated toward in the end, but when you're there at the, you know, space, the Kingdom Hall they call it, Jehovah's Witnesses call it, when you're in that space at the temple, the church, whichever word you want to use, 3-4 times a week, and then you're out door knocking as well, spreading the gospel door to door to the 4 corners of the earth, as Jesus said. You know, you really learn what it's like to be immersed in something and to really give it power in your life. And when I finished studying here, the formal courses, of which Lauren was one of my teachers. And I was very, very happy to have done that. I called up my dad on the night I'm eloped, and I was really just thanked him, from the bottom of my heart, that he showed me what to do when I got into this space. There was no guesswork. For me, it was like, some people come into a temple like this or a space like this, a spiritual space, and they go, wow, this is awesome, I want to lead a spiritual life. And then you get ethics dropped on you, and maybe you get courses and text to read and study, and people are like, holy shit, this is a lot of work, man. I knew how much work it was from the very beginning. So when I came in here, I was like, oh yeah, no problem. It's kind of a little bit easy. You don't have to go door knocking with this stuff. So that makes it easier, for one. So I was very thankful to see what a proper spiritual practice looks like. And it wasn't the one that I chose in the end. And my family and I are good with that. So it was very valuable to me in that respect. It was also very problematic to coming out of that space is very difficult with certain practices, certain lineages, certain ways of thinking about spirituality. Certain churches, if you like, have a less open view than maybe a space like this, like the Mahasuka Center. And leaving that space can be a real issue for them. And it can be different from church to church and from person to person. I'm not saying that it's the same for every Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall everywhere in the world, but and also I think a lot of it was in my mind. The issues that came up were in my mind about to be a goalie for a football team. I seem to remember in the murky past, but pretty soon after that it was like, yeah, still have sex as well. Yeah. That was pretty important, you're right. I left that bit out. Yeah, that was pretty important. So moving through, I think probably the next, in brief, the next 7, I would go to different churches. And even when I started DJing nationally in England and internationally, I would do my gig and I would be out doing all sorts of drugs and drinking till God knows when. And then I'd get up in the morning on Sundays and go to a church in the city that I was in, just to probably attracted to sacred spaces of all sorts. And we would go out to Glastonbury sometimes. When we'd be at Glastonbury Festival, we'd always end up out there by the stone circles in Avebury. And so it was very random in a way, exploring, looking to find if there was something that could work. And one of the problems I had, one of the issues that I had was I couldn't find a complete system. And I may even have gone back to another form of Christianity had I been able to find what I considered to be a complete system, from beginning to end, mapped out. And the first time I came across something close to that was when I went to a yoga ashram, which I didn't know was an ashram actually. When I first started going to yoga, I started practicing in the Satyananda lineage, who are of, I think, the Shivananda lineage, they call them here. And so I turned off, and there was all the women dressed in orange. It was all run by women, actually, the one I was at. And they had the mark here. And so I practiced with them for years. And then when I moved to LA, actually, I went down to Exhale in Santa Monica. And I thought, well, I've got to get into yoga. I just moved over from England. I thought I'd go down to the yoga studio and see what yoga looks like in LA. So I turned up, and there was this heaving room full, and I'm used to being around 12 people at once, half of them kind of, with the shawls and stuff. I turn up, and I'm practicing. Halfway through the class, I look up, my head's just spinning. In front of me, there's this girl in basically a bra and her knickers with a bum in my face, and she's super hot. And I'm like, oh my, this is kind of distracting, actually. Behind me, there's this big, buff dude who looks like he's been in some kind of, full power yoga for years. And I'm like, oh, that's a bit intimidating. I'm kind of, and I had no idea. I thought yoga was done all around the world, like in an ashram, like I've been going to. Authentic to who I felt I wanted to be and to what I wanted to be, this lineage, but I discovered it through her. And so I spent the next 3 or 4 years, I guess, practice and grounding and you'd be in a hotel room when you're touring. I don't know how much you guys know about that, but when you're touring, you're just often in a different hotel room every day, if not every couple of days when you're on a long drive tour, and then generally for 3 or 4 days a week you'll be away in a different country. Even you might be the UK, then Holland, then Japan for a few days, and then back to the UK, and then do 3 weeks in Australia, then to New Zealand, then on. So it's kind of like that. And I got to the point where I'd wake up in a hotel room and I'd really have to look out the window to see where I was, hear what language people were speaking. And I remember one time waking up in this room and looking, going, wow, I don't recognize this room. Where the hell is it? And it took me about 3 seconds to realize it was my bedroom. Actually, I just hadn't been there so long. So it's pretty disorienting, and it's a very extreme lifestyle to live, actually. And it's no mistake that many people turn to, drugs and alcohol are the easy one because they just hand it to you as you walk in the door. It's like, what would you like? Well, I'll have some weed, I'll have a couple of pills, give me some wine, give me some beer, and then everything else kind of flows from there. So I was doing that for a long time, and I think that's part of the reason why I was looking. You don't actually have to leave it all behind. But yes, you do. Yes, you do. You've got to leave it all behind. We've done all that. We need to move on now. New life, new me, So there's a lot of that, and it was cool. And there's an amount of it I think that we need. They call it renunciation in the Buddhist and yoga paths, right? There's some of that has to happen where you just go, everything I love. If I'm really into this, if I'm really going to commit to it, and not just be a try-harder or wannabe or do it, be a dilettante about it, then put it aside. Actually, what I thought I'd have to lose first.
Yeah, I remember.
I remember being scared shitless to meet Lama Marut for the first time because I thought he'd say, well, first thing you can do is cut your hair. And he never did, of course. It's stupid to think now, but I was frightened of that for a good couple of years, I think. I was waiting for that day to come when he'd go, look, if you're really, really into it, if you really want to prove you're into it, cut your hair. And it got to the point where I think I resisted it for a long time, and I remember for about 8 months listening to Lama Marut teaching, and the other lamas here at the center, Lama Lauren, Lama Lindsay, Lama Rick, and going, I can't bring myself to go to that place. And it was only at the point where I said, okay, give up everything. Everything, like if I think I'm going to do music, if I'm still hoping to do this and still do music, it's not real. And it was only at the point where I was like, okay, fuck it. If it has to be, if I have to cut my hair and give up music and never do that again, then I'm going to do it. And I turned up. I turned up here. And it was awesome. And that view changed everything for me, I think. So I've been to a lot of things where I was like, well, yeah, this is cool and the teacher's awesome, but I can still just go back to doing what I was doing. There's no real commitment there. So for me, being ready to give up everything was a big step. And I don't think everyone has to do that. I'm just a bit idiotic. I need to do it like that. I have to do it in extremes for it to work for me. So that was a powerful statement to myself, and that was the beginning of the next finger in the air to all the ways I'd lived my life that I felt needed to be changed. And my teachers kept saying, dude, come on, you don't have to be so extreme about it. And also, you got to pay the bills, right? You still got to live through all this. So I kept playing as little as I could. I was still in the studio sometimes, and completed the courses with Lama Lauren and Lama Marut, amongst others, Lama Lindsay, Lama Rick, and so forth, and did the advanced courses here as well. And kind of most of that time was spent trying to learn how to integrate the rest of my life and the spiritual life. The same thing I was looking for as a 17-year-old leaving the Jehovah's Witness church. At last I was finding a way of putting those things together again. And I still don't feel like it's very clear to me in some ways how to do that. I still find myself stumbling through a lot of this, especially because I run into people who are incredible practitioners all the time, out when I'm playing. And I feel like I'm being taught all the time. People teaching me how to live these teachings instead of thinking about them or writing about them. A real and embodied version, I guess, of what the latter stages of the path would lead to. And I think one of the things that attracted me to the yogic and Buddhist paths is that from the very beginning, obviously there's the Lam Rim in the Tibetan tradition, but I think there's versions of the Lam Rim in many of the South Asian traditions that really tell you how to go from when you start all the way through to the point of quote-unquote enlightenment. And different models will tell you that enlightenment looks different, of course, and that I believe they're just words describing the same experiences. But I didn't see that in the Christian tradition. I saw some beautiful mystic Christians teaching, but it seemed like the formalization of that path had somehow been lost, and I'm not quite sure why or how that happened. You could argue there are many cultural and sociological reasons for that. In the West, Christianity is being part of the Orthodox system, that concretized version that's meant to hold society together, and religion has traditionally been used for that, to keep social stability, maintain social stability. So I think with that comes the loss of the direct connection to the divine, and in the South Asian tradition, that direct connection seemed to have been respected still, integrated into the social fabric of their societies, and still respected. So that's what I was looking for. What the hell would happen after the rapture?
Well, now so there are two things that I'm thinking about right now. One is, just to talk about that idea of ethics and compassion that you were talking about, and integrating it into a regular life. Now, yours was not particularly regular. You're talking about, the life of a DJ, the life of being on tour. But many people in many different, ways of life confront that, whether it's corporate or legal or business or whatever it is. Dynamics, ways of living that where ethics and compassion is not necessarily high on the list of what's important. And music or being a DJ, as you said, seems to be one of those.
When you're dropped out of it, it can also be doubly disappointing because of that. And I think in terms of ethics with music and art, the rewards can be very high as well. So the temptation to do shitty things to achieve those goals, whether it's money or fame or notoriety, sex, whatever it is that much higher, I think, is that much more prominent. And so for a long time, I had no idea how to handle it, and I think I asked my Swami Pragyamurti in the Satyananda tradition in London exactly that question: how am I meant to live this life and not fall prey to these things? Because human nature then is give me, or if someone else is getting something that I want, more of this,
right?
And it took the retraining of a traditional path, the yogic and Buddhist path, for me to do that, to really negotiate it successfully. And it also took for me, and again, it's different for everyone, but for me, it took finding a teacher that would just tell me that the bullshit's over, here's what to do. And if you don't want to do it, then you just don't want the happiness that will come from that. You say that you want to, Darren, you say you want to not be doing these things to people, and you don't want to be doing these things to yourself. But if that's what you want, then X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C, more like.
And then doing it.
Yeah, and then doing it, which is the hard part, obviously. But I did have the help of being in those spaces with art and music that really give you a clear taste of the goal of that. If it is like, okay, if you practice rehabituate the mind to these systems of ethics, this is what's going to happen. You're going to feel beautifully connected to everyone all the time. You're going to want other people to be happy and to be vibing on this, not only this band and piece of music, but whatever, that car you just bought, or this the job that you, whatever it is, in life and everyday life. If I thought, one of the driving factors for me is that if I felt like I feel in those peak moments all the time, then that would be absolutely brilliant. So I don't know what it's like for other people who don't have that connection with music. Maybe it's other things for other people.
Well, that kind of brings me to another another thing I wanted to talk about, or ask you about, you've kind of already talked about it, because certainly experiences, that to me was very much a part of everything that I was trying to learn and practice. And just hearing you talk about that music and art gave you gives people a look at what the goal is, was like, yeah, that kind of describes it exactly. So one of my questions for you was to kind of talk about that, that intersection between music and a spiritual practice, a spiritual trajectory, a spiritual desire or interest, and how one informs the other. And you kind of answered it, but I don't know, can you talk more about it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, really the first time that you teachers here gave us the opportunity to speak to that, it was very raw, and we didn't really even, it was just correlations that we had drawn together, and it seemed to Claire and I from very early on that the high states in the text that they talk about would seem to be very much like what was happening to people on the dance floor, and so we pulled together this presentation that spoke to those parallels. And then the more that you dig into that, I think the more that you see it's like this, bottomless well. And we started to really explore why every authentic tradition has an arts and music component at some point. And often it's at the advanced stages. Probably in my experience, if I look at what I needed at the time, I had to start out with ethics just to learn how to not be a dickhead. And then at some point when I got a little bit of a handle on that, then we'd get shuffled along the path. And then at some point that embodiment has to happen, where the texts have to be put down, and the blah blah blah, and and the thinking about it and the poring over it has to be set aside, and it has to be embodied, it has to be lived moment to moment. And as I said, the experience on the dance floor really speak to that. But what we're trying to explore with Lauren was talking about the Dub Kirtan All-Stars, a band that David Starfire and I have, that's electronic music with a full band. Because I would see some kids would be at the Dub Kirtan gigs, at the Symbiosis one in particular. I remember seeing kids who I would just see absolutely mash up at gigs where we play at other places, turn up at this festival, and they're down the front and chanting like crazy, do you know what I mean? And I wouldn't expect to be anything other than functional. They'd probably, if they'd done it and felt shit, they probably would have stopped. But with everyone chanting and everyone dancing, the vibe, this high vibe just erupts. It's very interesting seeing those two things combined. And it does seem to do, it's more than the sum of its parts. And so the music side of things will do it anyway. Just if you dance for long and hard enough, I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but if you just go in and just march on the dance floor for 3-4 hours, consciousness starts to shift. It's very much like mantra, right? With mantra, just one of the things it does is it just stops the blah blah mind, that just stops the self-talk that goes on all the time. So dancing will do the same thing. Dancing with the kind of frequencies that are just deluging our physical bodies and energetic bodies that dance music does, right from 10 hertz all the way up to the top of the spectrum, all of them manipulated specifically to have an effect on your body by the producers. That's a powerful thing anyway. And so the Dub Kirtan All-Stars was our attempt to make sense of the ancient tradition and the modern tradition, and why would anyone even care about this stuff if they don't have the type of mind that likes this kind of thing. A lot of people don't. They come in here and they're just like, I didn't for a long time. It just reeked of being confined and not being able to do what I want to do and all this crazy Tibetan stuff or whatever. I love it now. So that was a way of taking this kind of idea out to people and also trying to make sense of it ourselves. And then part of that experience was the yoga and bass workshops that Claire Thompson and I would present at these raves. So we'd go and we'd go out and we'd do a workshop where we'd talk about some of the things we're talking about here for a little while, and then we'd do a yoga asana class, which is really way more popular than kirtan and chanting. Yoga is everywhere, as we all know. So people would get it from that perspective, and then I would DJ while Claire leads the asana class, and people would, that be the easing them in. And then we'll go, okay, if you really want to go to the next level, we're going to be playing tomorrow night at the such and such stage, and you can come down and just try the dancing with the mantra and the movement, the embodied practice that you're doing with the asana class, but take the embodied practice to another level. It's like take the structure away, right? And that's kind of what we're doing here. We start with ethics with a lot of structure and a lot of confinement, a lot of boundaries, because we need that. Then at some point that structure...
And it's like, now, so how do you know, what would you say? How do you know when that point to say, okay, I understand the structure, or I have at least a little bit of the understanding of, and when we say ethics, it's like, it's not for its own sake. There's a reason, right? Why we live, quote, an ethical life, which really just means a life of kindness, like you keep saying, not hurting anybody. And there's a reason why it's important to do that, and to kind of look at the ways in which, we don't think we're hurting anybody because we're not smacking them over the head, but actually, whether physically, probably not physically, but some kind of emotionally or something like that, we're knocking people out of our way as we make our way through the world. And beginning to recognize how we do that. And then at a certain point, like I said, you let it go. How do you negotiate that you let it go because so much is integrated? How do you know when you're at that point, or what kind of exploration do you do to find out whether or not you're at that point?
I think for Claire and I, when we're doing the yoga-based things and when we have the Dub Kirtan All-Stars performances, we're in the Burning Man scene. There are just so many amazing, quote-unquote, practitioners, people who are just living, they have this beautiful way of being, and most of the time, I'm kind of going, I'd like to be more like you, actually, So it's a great learning thing for us to be around people like that. But one thing I do notice is that, and this is maybe where I could make a delineation if people ask, and most of the time they don't, by the way, but if people do ask, is the kind of, I need more music, I need another festival to make me feel like this. That's one of the signs for me when it's like the self-generation hasn't happened yet. It's because music is so powerful. You can be, I've seen it myself. I can be a kind of shitty person and still have great experience on the dance floor.
Right.
It'll be different for everyone because everyone's body is different and everyone's energy is different. But one of the things that stops us having those experiences on the dance floor and stops us our meditation as well being as good as it can be is the work with us, and it's based on pretty much our own experience, my experience anyway, of trying to do the same thing,
Yeah. So one kind of maybe last question before we kick it open is, you mentioned meditation. I know that recently you have spent a lot of time with a, do you call it a shamatha meditation?
Yeah, shamatha vipassana.
Okay, so it's some people might call it a mindfulness meditation, paying attention to attention and paying attention to awareness. Others might call it being in the present and being fully present with the present. How does it work for you so far to carry that over into either, because I know you're doing a startup business now, or into...
I used to go in the studio and 10 hours would go past, no problem. You just look up and it's like, oh, well, that's today gone. And there's something kind of cool about that when you're so immersed in something, you're not really conscious of what's going on around. You're so immersed in the project at hand, and it's a very beautiful space to be in creatively. but it's not a very conscious space either. There's a loss of, from the shamatha vipassana method, I would say there's a loss of awareness sort of collapsing into attention. And what I've found challenging actually is to try and maintain that awareness in the creative state, which is hard because when you're passionate about creation, it's kind of like flipping a switch, like normal conscious mind gets kind of switched off, and then suddenly it's into creativity mode. Any of you are creative people, I'm sure, have at least some aspect of not the same thing. And what it does is you can get in touch with a very beautiful space. You can create interesting things. Maybe it's a more direct line to the subconscious, and when you have the technique to be able to channel that, it's effective in creating pieces of art. But I don't think it helps mindfulness in the rest of the day around other people. Easy as you want. You can roll around on the floor. You can,
I
hang
thought
off.
that's what they all were.
Well, there's definitely a lot of that in a lot of the raves out there. No one's going to really blink an eye at Burning Man or whatever, no matter what you do. But this is almost like a consensual thing. You come into the space, and also there's a few other beautiful boundaries that work well for this space. Often one is no eye contact. So it's really just about you get in that space, in that zone, and it's almost, to me, reminds me of the noble silence of a shamatha retreat. Mm-hmm. Don't, and then this thought pops up into awareness. The methodology of doing it. You're doing it on the dance floor. You've got these people together like a sangha, in a way, on the dance floor, and you have these beautiful boundaries, and then you work with that practice. I think the reason that Master Chiladasa teaches the shamatha vipassana method is because it's very specifically teaches you how to train attention and awareness. And I think those two things in parallel are a really good thing. Learning the science behind why our mind won't stay on a single object necessarily if we put our mind there, and how to work with the awareness in conjunction with that. So we can utilize those, and they both will make each other more powerful. I did a little interview with Master Chiladasa that we haven't yet posted, but talking specifically from the perspective of a Theravada meditation master, how music can help you practice. He's all about it. He plays a mean sitar, apparently. People keep telling me. He's like, no, I'm not that good. But everyone else is like, I'm telling you, this guy's good. So, and he was talking about the idea that in a band even, there's again the attention and awareness thing. You have to have the attention on what you're playing, but the awareness on what everyone else is playing, and you have to maintain the exact balance of those. And that's almost by definition a great band, is where each player can hold their attention on what they're playing, but at the same time have a vivid awareness of what's going on in the room around them, and then the interplay between those things.
What it is that you...
To inspiration, really, very much about that, the development. And the instrument become one almost, and that all technique and no inspiration is very dry and boring, and all inspiration and no technique just sounds like shit. So the balance between those things is the key to great art, right? It's
need to be called up.
Hi, my name is Dan. I'm a musician. I also do sound recording.
Hey Dan.
I'm interested in like an aspiring DJ. I haven't done much, but what do you suggest for someone who's just starting out, being a DJ, but also learning music and musician?
In terms of music in general, or as it relates to trying to fit it into a spiritual life, or just purely in terms of music?
Well, to be a DJ, like do it for like ecstatic dance, or
I think the technique, as we're just saying, the technique is really important because it's hard to take people on a journey if you're struggling with the technique and that's audible in what you're playing. There's some people, and there's different ways of doing it. There are some people who don't mix at all when they're DJing, and they're all about the tune selection, and their tune selection is just so bang on. I mean, you see the old reggae selectors, right? And they'll have a huge stack of speakers and then one record player, and they'll play a 45, and when they're finished, take the needle off, take the record off, and put another one on with a few crazy dub sirens in between. Right? There's no mixing involved, but those gigs go off. So there's a technique in that respect, and that's the selection of the music. The journey they take you on is just incredible. And then there's the other end of the spectrum is your scratch DJs, your invisible scratch pickles and guys like that. And go in and rip. you get so discouraged, man, if you come in and there's only a few people there, or there's some people go, this is crap, could you play something else? Have you got any Madonna? Have you got any whatever, you know? And in that way, your technique is really important, and the reason that you're playing is really important. Why are you there? What is it for? Why are you even in the room? And if your intention's right, it doesn't matter what happens at the gig. People can throw tomatoes at you, no problem. That's a great teaching and patience right there. And maybe I need to learn to take on some different musical journeys to help people than the one I'm currently going on. So yeah, intention and technique.
Thank you. And learn the technique. How do you suggest to do that?
To start with, there's a million great tutorials on YouTube, I have to say. But then at some point, you probably want to, a quicker way is finding good teachers. Go to Dubspot. There's a Dubspot opening up in LA here, or one of those places where you can just do short, intense courses and get all the skills that you need. I mean, these days it's so damn easy to get the technical aspect of it down. You know, because of everything online now, it's incredible. There's so many great websites that will teach you that, and the same for producing music as well.
So the important thing is like getting good music, right? That's very important.
In terms of the playing and DJing, yeah, getting good music, but also getting music that's different from everyone else, which means you're probably going to embark down the path of producing music, which is kind of a long and, pretty full-on road itself. So again, intention, why are you doing that? If you're just doing it for the money, you're going to get pretty, there's a small chance you might become the next Skrillex, and hats off to you if you do. Chances are you're going to be like the rest of us and not be the next Skrillex. And it's going to be a hard road. And so what's in your heart is what's going to change everything. Why are you doing it?
So you mentioned, I'm curious about how this practice affects, or having this spiritual practice affects your creativity. And you mentioned before about, you were doing very well, yet you were still what you call a dickhead.
Pretty much, yeah.
and
where you're not hurting people, how when people are really grasping, trying to repeat that experience on the dance floor the whole time, there's a lot of anxiousness around that. Music's so powerful, we can have these amazing experiences. But one of the things that I noticed was that as I learned to try and iron out the kindness aspect of my life, I became less anxious about having those peak experiences because they were starting to happen much more outside of the creative realm. And then the funny thing that comes with that is that it's also easier to have them when you're in that performance space as well. You gotta bear in mind that, for a long time, I had a pretty significant drugs and alcohol rider. Well, the alcohol was official, the drugs weren't. And that was how I played a lot of the time. So at some point, I got bored of that, and it was actually before I took vows or anything like that. For a good couple of years beforehand, I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna knock this on the head because I have a short attention span, and once I've done something for a while, I'm kind of like, it either really works for me, and if it doesn't, then I'm gonna stop doing that. So it was important to me to find a space that I could reach on stage when I'm playing, doubly important because I was straight. I'd be in a room full of people that are on pills and alcohol and both, and they were having an awesome time, it's great, but I was straight as a die. So for me to try and work out how I can get into that zone without any help was really important. And one of the things I found was that the ethical side of the practice made it easier for me to just drop into that space, And also a lot of the teachings about, from the Buddhist and yoga perspective about selflessness as well really helped. When I get nervous or kind of freaked out by that experience, I just have a little bit more space to just watch my mind and go, okay, well that's just, the ego self getting all messed up about stuff, and just observe it and let it go. And sometimes it would go and sometimes it wouldn't, but at least there was a little buffer there because of my practice to not get completely fucked up about it. And then, because when you're trying to get into that performance space and you're anxious, it's the worst thing. Like things don't flow, and you know, even when you're in that space and you're not anxious, you can even mess mixers up and just like, that's fine. The next one you're just straight back in the zone and no problem. You don't even think about it twice. When you're anxious about it, you mess one mix up. For the next half hour, you're like, oh God, I messed that mix up, and everyone's having a bad time because of me. If you're just living life as an artist, you know, there's this romantic thing around, you know, burning bright and half as fast, you know, like the line from Blade Runner. Yeah, something like that. That was my experience.
What would be your number one reason for doing everything that you do? Like your source, like your personal source, after all of this work that you're doing? What is the main source that you do this for? Who is it for? What is it for? Like, what is it when you're traveling around the world, rocking it, and you're sober, and you're doing your thing, and you're in the element of doing this for the people, and you're getting that reaction and that source out of the people? Is that the sole reason why you're doing this today? And what would be your sole purpose of doing it?
Now,
After everything, like today, why did you come here?
yeah.
You know, like what, like your journey. You know, you're on a life journey right now, and like, who's that for?
Cyrus is asking who is the musical journey for? Why am I doing it? It's changed over time, to be honest, Cyrus. It's started out because I wanted lots of money and fame and sex and the other things that come with it. Just because that's when you're a kid, it's kind of like that. And I really, like I said early on, I was pretty sure of what I wanted to do, so it was kind of like, that was okay, heading down that path. And then at some point it became, and you know, still is to some extent, that I want to try and contribute something with my music. You know, for a long time people would come up and say, oh, you played this set I was at and it changed my life or something, and I would just think, I thought I played shit that night, you know. But so it's so that you learn from this process that is so about each of our journey. I might go and play in front of people and have a certain intention, and I might be really wanting to help them, and they might have a terrible time, or I might not even be thinking about that. I might be thinking about getting home to sleep, and I might play terribly, and they might have a great experience. So at some point, that when I started letting go of the control that I thought, before we, am I in the way?
Shall I turn this one off too? I'm sorry? No, okay.
So if you weren't sure from my meandering conversation there what the Dub Kirtan All Stars is, or what the yoga-based workshops are, these will give you a little idea.
Reaching these ecstatic states on the dance floor and the path of music were connected.
What does yoga base mean? Yoga is a Sanskrit word that means union. So to us, the yoga base means the feeling of union and connectedness that we experience in peak states on the dance floor, coming together as bodies. That's the base.
Then yoga can also be translated as practice. So in this context, it means making your dance floor experience into a spiritual practice. Or you could say the practice of dancing to bass music. And the goal of this practice is to bring this love, this unity, this connectedness that we feel on the dance floor, off the dance floor, and into our lives.
The workshops combine discussion, philosophy, and meditation with a yoga and free movement session, integrated with a deep, rich, dub and bass-oriented DJ set.
Actually, one of our students from the East Coast does a surfing in Downline. You know Chris Krajewski, has he got a video before? Yeah, so Chris does a surfing in Dharma workshop.
Oh,
Yeah, it was pretty
You can put music in there too, huh?
Right.
Turns out we did start by Andrew Gnosty, and together we have a project called Updates on All Stars. It's kind of fusing the Asian, South Asian tradition of devotional chanting, or kirtan, that's normally associated with yoga in this country, with the beats and bass of the underground electronic scene. A lot of people have done the dancing aspect that we bring together for the dance floor with the music. A lot of people have done the chanting aspect in temples or in their own personal spiritual practice. And so we try and bring them together and have a fusion of those two things and kind of supercharge the two of them together. Yeah, I come from a background of pretty hard underground electronic music, so it's a kind of odd pairing really in some respects. It happened for me in a way that I knew about kirtan but wasn't really that interested in it. I practiced in a Buddhist yogi lineage, and my teacher said, you need to start kirtan band. And I thought, well, I don't know how to play really, and I'm not much of a singer, but I can make beats. So we started to put together this project maybe 3 years ago in LA, and Lama Samadhi Maru, my teacher said, I'm coming to town in 3 months' time, you've got to get something together. You've got to put on a workshop, urban retreat, he called it. So I called up David because he knew about this stuff, but I didn't. And said, dude, we got to do this thing. So we got a bunch of our friends in the scene at the time, right? Yeah. You know, some of them were players, some were singers, some were from a pure traditional South Asian music. Rick Siraj, who sang with us, who's passed now, but he was one of the early inspirations. And we pulled together the first Kirtan All-Stars performance, which was in a Buddhist temple, actually. And
I was just thinking that it wasn't a question as much as a memory when you were talking about always looking for the next thing and the next thing, the next version of the music called Chasing the Dragon. And the problem with Chasing the Dragon is you can never get that high. And the more you chased it, the harder it was. So it became an exercise in anger and frustration, and it actually fed the worst things. And I was thinking about the first time that I had to face being creative without drugs. And I had convinced myself that without the drugs I couldn't be creative. And it was a huge leap of faith and scary as hell to go into that space again and say, do I still know how to, can I still do this? And it took a long time to realize, wait a minute, this is actually getting to work again. And I'm sober, I'm straight, you know, and so it's not a question that more than resonated so much with, not in the music world, but in mine.
Yeah.
But similar.
Definitely is, I think. I heard Shivadasa say something really
Exactly.
but it's not quite.
It's almost there.
So maybe if I have a little more of it, it would.
Right.
Right. The problem is the more you have of it, the less almost there it gets. You get further and further away. The last thing you think of is, well, just stop. You just say, maybe you got bad stuff.
Right. That's the problem.
Go find another dealer, you know.
Very cool.
It was like something happened in the high playing. Like I noticed like going from gig to gig is awesome because you have a goal after a goal. You have a goal, you meet that goal, you perform. Are able to heal themselves because we're kind of in our realm of people, we're really lucky to be around conscious people who are like saying, you know, can help you along the way, but a lot of these partiers, they're just shooting the moon and then they have to like deal with their lives, and they have to like not freak out, and like how, you know, to like deliver them this good music. You know, that's pretty much our savior right now, is this incredible sound, these EQ, the entire frequencies we get to deal with, right?
I think also the practice element is really important, because I noticed going to, in the, they call it the West Coast Transformational Festival scene. And one of the things I noticed is that it's amazing people, for one. And often the DJ booth will be a giant altar with these amazing crystals and artifacts from various lineages and stuff. I mean, it's incredible. It's actually a thing now. People are going creating altars at these festivals. It's very beautiful. But one of the things that I don't see there so much is the idea that you are transformed at this transformational festival, hopefully, and that then you take that away, and there's a daily component to a daily practice component. And I think if you're looking at the way that all authentic forms of spirituality work, there are these rituals where you have these mind-blowing experiences and this transformation, and hopefully you were transformed in some way. And then you go out and use the daily practices to then blend that transformation into the rest of your life, to fold it into the rest of the life. And I don't see that so much in
practice, and to be the teacher who can inspire that through my practice, for me and for others. I'm not talking about like screw up, you know, but I have to be able to maintain that, which doesn't mean a rejection of that teacher. I don't need that teacher anymore. I'm going to do it myself. You know, that teacher, those teachers are amazing. But as well, to become the practitioner, to become the teacher, to use it, you know, to sustain it. You know,
become the teacher of yourself.
Right. Become the teacher.
To
Right. Exactly.
Take over any of those other teachers and become that teacher of yourself, so you can go on.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's the goal in life, right? Is to get to that state where you're self-contained spiritually. You know, you love yourself completely. And that's what's really hard. You can get to that spot of loving yourself day in and day out. Like not like, I'm noticing in the mornings it's hardest for me. If I come out, I'll be groggy in the morning if I eat too much sugar or something like that. You know, usually sugar, that really gets me bad in the morning. I'm thinking such odd thoughts and stuff like that. But when you come back to, you know, basically simple things like I love myself, you know, I deeply love, like I'm doing a practice right now, I'm tapping, and I'm doing, I tap with a mantra, and my personal one is I deeply love and accept myself. So whenever those things come up for me, when I super get bummed about like, oh, my identity goes away, and I'm like what we were talking about, like, am I a musician anymore, or am I just a worker now? Now as you know, all these like different things come up for me as an artist, I can tap and use a mantra like that, you know, to inform myself of that love for myself. So I don't know. That's kind of like
practice,
I'm doing.
exactly.
It's a practice.
Bring in
okay?
the
So
practice. You know where you want to be because you felt it on the dance floor and in these different states. But
Yeah.
it sometimes, most of the time, for most of us, takes that practice to then engender that outside of it.
Then you have the technique.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah, I think it's
That's
almost.
one of the reasons you keep chasing after it. Is, well, it's not supposed to be low, so if you go low, and somehow something's wrong. But that's life.
Yeah, I always think of it. It's almost more of not an ecstasy, but an acceptance, like
Yeah.
this profound
Right.
acceptance
Right.
of myself, of my world, of other people. You know, I mean,
That's
this
a secret.
profound
Yeah,
sense of acceptance that is, that you know, so that the anxiety, that the desire is like, it's not painful. You know?
Darren, did you ever, because I know how, I've dated a lot of musicians and I see this just really difficult lifestyle.
Sorry to hear that.
And did you ever go through periods where you kind of lost that? Because I know you were saying no matter what, every morning, you know, up, and then that was before you even got on this path, and then you get a whole bunch
Yeah.
more practices to do. Did you ever have periods where you kind of fell off the wagon, so to speak, as far as your practice?
Please say yes. Please say yes.
And
Yeah.
then how did you get back on?
I still do.
Yeah, so and then how do you motivate yourself? How do you then get back on the cushion, you know?
It becomes, for me, I'm quite a disciplined person in very specific ways. In lots of ways, I'm totally not. I can barely turn up on time anywhere ever. But in other ways, I can get in the studio when I need to get in the studio. I can do my practice most of the time. So, the period I was talking about was, I'd be going out and playing, and I would just get up and do my practice. It was almost a reaction to the extremes. It was the one extreme, which was just this disciplined Vinaya style practice, man. It was like, get on the mat every day, do the hour before you get in the plane. And then the other side was obviously the chaos and mayhem of the music industry. But I think that it's almost harder for me when there are less extremes, because I'm just left with just me and my mind and me, just my life, and I'm not playing as much as I used to at the moment. And I'm working with a startup company that involves, I'm a partner in a company called Subpack that builds these tactile sub-bass units, and they're amazing, and I'm passionate about getting tactile sound out in the world because it increases people's experience of music. It's a whole new, hypocritical about it. I mean, kind of as a teacher, there's a certain amount of hypocrisy, no matter which way you go, because you're not doing everything all the time, right? So, I mean, there's got to be some leeway where you're just talking about stuff that you're not necessarily doing at the time, but you presumably do it with the intention that it's useful for people. So those two things are really, but it's hard, it is hard. I think maintaining a practice is really difficult, and that's why most people don't do it. I think that's why Chuladasa, Master Chuladasa, and his method, his step one and his presentation of the classic 9 steps of meditation is having a daily practice, just getting on the cushion every day. And that's the hardest thing. Even the most advanced steps from where you were at the step before is way more easy than going from not having a practice to a practice. That's way the hardest, the biggest step that any person will ever take on their spiritual journey. So, and then maintaining that, obviously, there's going to be a lot of, I felt like and still feel there's, an amount of that, way less than there was, but.
Yeah, it's really true about the extremes. It's so interesting.
You find you've had a similar experience?
Yeah, very much so. That when I have to kind of fight for it, I do. But when it would just be so easy, it's almost, yeah. But I'm an extreme person too, so maybe it's not like that for everyone.
I can relate as well. Like, I was just traveling recently, and I prepared myself mentally before going, that despite the time difference or whatever, and different living, circumstances, that so much of it was out of my control, that I was going to make the time and do it, no matter what time of day it happened, And then when I came back to LA, it was like this vacuum, like the energy to do it wasn't there so much. I was like, this is weird, just to notice that like, it was easier perhaps to do it then, but it was harder actually.
Yeah.
And so my question there is, do you have a technique to increase the energy, and does that involve changing your practice a little bit or spicing it up?
If that works, it's a good thing to do, I think. But most teachers recommend the really boring method, which is just having the schedule and just getting up, and I just don't give myself the leeway to do anything else. Just get up at 9 o'clock. There's not
About the fact that you wanted this, that you weren't wishy-washy about it. And I think that's one of the things too, is that if you remind yourself what it is that you want, why it is that you're doing it, what it is that you're, so that's one of them. And then just for me, the thing about whatever time you set, and I mean, this has worked great for me in a number of ways. Like,
about that, isn't it?
Like going on with the rest of your day.
There's something about that, isn't it? It's like I am the kind of person who gets up and meditates. Right? And when my mind goes, well, no, all sorts of interesting things you could do. No, I am the kind of person. And then when you don't do it, if it falls apart or whatever, then it's the kindness practice, compassion practice, not beating yourself up and not making, because it can become even worse if you lose your practice, like you say. Part of the biggest thing I found is then beating myself up about it makes you way less likely to get back on the cushion. And then when you don't, there's more beating up, and it's this vicious cycle of like non-deliverance and I knew you wouldn't do it and you didn't. There you go. I told you. No, but tomorrow, really. And there you go again.
It's
So-
like dieting.
Yeah. That compassion thing is really important too. Alicia did some really good classes on that, I think, didn't she? She did at least. Didn't she do a talk on losing your practice and? Yeah. Oh right, she did. She talked about it at a Maroke, did she? I'm so sure. Like you, like a child, like you say. Huh? And then you go, yes, and well done. Aren't you good? Because it's speaking to a part of our mind. It's not this, what we're talking on now. It is a very subconscious, childlike aspect of the mind. So working with that is important. You guys got any good tips about creativity and your practices? Have they affected each other and formed each other? I'm always interested to hear about other people's ways of doing the same thing. I have my kooky ways, but I'm sure other people have.
I think I found something about having a practice, having a meditation practice, and what you said about anxiety, I found to be very true, because the overall experience is different. Because in the art form that I participate in, I'm always working with people, and so when you're realizing how you're experiencing the environment with which you're working in with other people, and art is your how you treated other people in the past, your ethics affects your experiences in all areas of your life, including your artistic experiences with other people, and that those could be much more sweet, and that of course that affects your creative flow, and also with the anxiety removed, because you're able to listen, you're able to sense different things, things become more subtle in ways. And it wasn't until sort of looking back and not ever having a practice like, oh, I have a meditation that I work on that's directly related to more creative genius. Not that at all, but just that they bled together. They were blending, and
That's cool.
and I didn't, you don't really know how or why until you think about causes.
I think is always
Surrender.
I also have played a lot with the boundaries that I put around this is practice and this is creative practice, and I mean, especially too in those times when I feel like I'm not doing my meditation the way I should be, really dropping that like how it's supposed to look. Yeah, I know that setting the time and doing it at the same time every day, and having that habit be strong is my goal. But when it's not happening, rather than beating myself up for it, really looking to see where it is happening, where that is showing up, and I feel like where it shows up the most is in my creativity, and when I allow that, I found that then I very often will just stop and just meditate or just, and it doesn't have to be in some necessarily specific formula, even though that's the goal and that's part of it too, but letting go of some of that structure And also even in the formal practice, I mean, it's like there's a part of my practice where you make offerings, for example, and actually having my instrument there, and bringing those two things together so that they aren't so separate in my mind, and where I can see them both in each other and just playing with that.
Yeah, having the, we're talking about music and dancing and making those a practice, and if you have some kind of practice like that, Claire is great, but actually does a whole lot of embodied movement kind of practice, and if your sitting practices, can be getting dry, a great way to, like you said, reinvigorate, that can be a good way to do it. That, doing a different form of practice is way better than doing no practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard to make practice on the shamatha vipassana method without sitting every day, but realistically there are going to be times when it's really, really hard, and better to do something else than to do nothing. Go, okay, well, I'm going to put on my favorite record and have a leap around the lounge room for a while and see how I feel then, rather than just go, I don't want to sit, I'm going to go out.
Send it to all beings, the joy.
Yeah,
I mean,
or singing, same thing,
Yeah.
just.
A musical something into, the experience of what we do here. Because I just, I think it's pretty extraordinary. I think people would love it.
Maybe we can get this guy down as well.
I'm local.
That'd be cool, I'd like to do that.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.